everyone. Welcome to Content Empowered Learning. I am Sara Beth Wald, and I am doing my second news analysis. So this goes in line with my Mastering the Media platform, which, of course, if you've been following me, you know is my answer to all of the divisiveness in the media, and I offer resources and if you're interested, a full-blown course on how to consume media responsibly and stay informed without giving in to all of that anxiety and all of the fear that tends to go along with some of our current events. So the course is called Mastering the Media, Navigating the News with Mindfulness. And this is something that I have started doing. I teach you how to do it in the course, but every week there is a new opportunity to have these conversations and compare news stories. So if you want a little more information about that, head over to my first video about navigating the news, and I talk a little bit more in that one about the process, highlighting and all of those sorts of things. So I'm not going to do that again. I'm just going to jump right into my news analysis. And if you follow me, you know that I try to use sources from both the left and the right, but the moderate ones. There is a great media bias chart by Ad Fontes, and I will post a link in the description, as well as links to these articles that I am going to analyze. My two favorites, my go-to, are the Wall Street Journal, which of course leans right, and the New York Times, which leans left. So those are the publications that I chose for today as well. There are others that you could do this to. These are just the two that I like to use. So I'm going to jump right into it. You can see I have notes, I have highlighted, and what I do is I go onto their websites, and I do have a membership. So it's $4 a month for each. If you're willing to pay for Netflix and all of these other services, you can pay for your news too, and I highly recommend it. It's not that much money, but if you don't go on their sites a lot, you should be able to access a few free articles. So you could still follow the links below in the description and get to these articles, hopefully. All right, so I'm just going to start with the New York Times. And what I do is I choose a story that is covering the same topic. So this is the congressional disagreement over the infrastructure bill. So the congressional drama, even, you can call it, over the infrastructure bill. This is one of the most fascinating analyses that I have done on a story. Their headlines are even, I mean, the headlines are always a little swayed, but wow. Okay, so and I'm just going to switch back and forth a little bit between the stories, but we're going to start with a headline like I always do. So the New York Times headline is, Republicans at odds over infrastructure bill as vote approaches. So the focus of the New York Times is on the Republican disagreement. And as we get into this more, you'll see that the implication is definitely that the Republicans are just not getting on board with this whole compromise thing, that they're the ones taking the hard line. So listen to this headline in the Wall Street Journal. Progressives split on backing Thursday's House infrastructure vote. What? So from the very beginning, it's if you're reading the New York Times, you're going to think that the reason that this bipartisan infrastructure bill is not going to pass is the Republicans' fault. All right. See, let me get over there. Republicans. And if you're reading the Wall Street Journal, it is all on the progressives right from the get-go, right? So there we go. That just cracks me up. Okay. Let me see here. There was something. All right. Sorry. I get lost in my own thinking here. So the New York Times, they have a subtitle or a subheading. The Times doesn't always do a subheading. The Wall Street Journal almost always does. So they felt like they needed to. So they say, with a bipartisan infrastructure bill set for a Thursday vote in the House, a campaign by business groups and some Senate Republicans to secure GOP support may be the measure's last hope. So they start right off with this whole, it's bipartisan. I mean, it feels, as you read the Times, really easy to see that the Times editorial stance is in support of this bill. Which is hard to avoid. If you take my media course, you understand bias. But I guess I would like to see a little less, like just right up front, this is how we feel about this. But okay, so if I dig into the article, the first paragraph kind of reiterates that subtitle, which is kind of why I feel like it's unnecessary, but that's okay. Business groups and some Senate Republicans working at cross purposes with Republican leaders in the House. Cross purposes, these Republicans, they can't even agree on anything, right? That's what we're getting from this. Although the measure is the product of a compromise among moderates in both parties. So again, we're looking at words, and we'll go back to that. If you followed me in the past, you know, I hone in on certain words. So these guys use compromise, and it feels just really kind of warm and fuzzy. This infrastructure bill is just the bee's knees, guys. Okay. They also like the word moderates. The Wall Street Journal uses the word moderates too, but towards the end they start going to the word centrist, which I think is interesting. Moderate is more and more getting, it's like a warm fuzzy word that people are liking that sort of leans left, left to center. And so centrist, you can see like they are forming the dialogue. Both, like the media is forming, they're choosing the dialogue, and it's everybody. If you know me, you know I am universally just not impressed. They all need to just chill on some of the bias. But bias is also something that we all experience. So I talk a lot about that in my course, and bias isn't necessarily even a bad thing. It's just a part of the human experience. So, but it is, so this is why it's so important you read both sides. Because if you're only reading one all the time, all you're doing is confirming your worldview, right? You are not getting the full picture. You're not getting the whole story. So it's important to read both sides. Do you have to go through and highlight, print the story out, highlight it and all that? No. What I'm teaching you to do here, though, is to think critically. And to show you how to compare, how to hone in some of those buzzwords like moderate versus centrist. Because guys, they mean the same thing, right? So they're just using the buzzwords that their audience is going to respond to the quickest. So anyway, we talked about compromise. House Republicans leaders are leaning on their members to reject the $1 trillion infrastructure bill. So the tone of this is the infrastructure bill is great, and the House Republicans are going to reject it. Reject is a really strong word. Oh, it's Republicans. And if you think I'm being hard on Republicans, you just wait, because or if I'm being hard on the Times. Everybody, it's universal. Everybody gets it. So untwist your panties and just listen. Okay. Reject the 1 trillion infrastructure bill by disparaging its contents and arguing that it will only pave the way for Democrats. So they're just arguing and they're disparaging. These are very negative words associated with Republicans, right? Their opposition has ratcheted up pressure on Speaker. Ratcheted up pressure. Ooh, scary words. But some Republican senators who helped write the bill, along with influential business groups, so we keep going back to all of the good guys want this bill. Those Republicans. So the Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable have started a counter effort to try to persuade House Republicans. So it makes it seem like these business groups are all with the Democrats, right? And they're just trying to persuade these inflexible Republicans, when in reality, if you participate in the world at large, you know that it's both. The Chamber of Commerce is built up of all different kinds of beliefs, right? But that is not the message that's coming across here. And ultimately, what happens with these two conflicting headlines? So the Republicans are at odds over the infrastructure bill. Progressives are split on backing Thursday's House infrastructure vote. The fact is, if Democrats are divided, it looks bad for them in the midterm elections, right? So the Times, being a left-leaning paper, they're going to avoid making it seem like the Democrats are at fault. They're trying to pin the blame, right? Well, guess what? The Wall Street Journal, which leans right, is doing the same thing in reverse. So if Republicans are divided, it looks bad for them in the midterm elections. So they're both trying to pin the blame on the other guy, right? And it's both of them, and always is. Always. You aren't going to find any that's not. So that's why you need to diversify your news sources. So let's see. They go to Senator Rob Portman, a Republican from Ohio. It's a good bill, he says. So the Republicans are saying it's a good bill too, the reasonable Republicans. It's right for the country. I'm encouraging Republicans to support. And, there is a word here. I'm going to get to this buzzword here in a little bit. I haven't got there yet. All right. Democrats accuse Ms. Pelosi of betrayal. So I left out an important word. Liberal Democrats have accused Ms. Pelosi of betrayal. And let's see, is this the end? No, sorry. I'd say the bill is likely to pass, but it's going to be a squeaker. Neil Bradley, an executive vice president and chief policy officer for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So we have to look at who they go to for sources. And we'll look at this again a little more when we get to the Wall Street Journal side of things. So let's see. Representative Steve Scalise, Republican of Louisiana, who runs his party's vote pressuring operation. You just try saying that fast. It's hard. Oh, that vote pressuring. Those Republicans are doing a lot of naughty stuff. We don't like that. And then on the next page, a few House Republicans who are members of the bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus. So there's another one. Now they're at the Chamber of Commerce. They're going to the Problem Solvers Caucus. There are a few reasonable Republicans, according to the New York Times, but just a few. Okay. Don Young of Alaska, the longest serving member of the House, so he's distinguished, announces his support with an impassioned speech on the House floor. Now you can't see this from where you're at, but there's a link there on an impassioned speech on the House floor. Down here, we jump to another link, hammered out by Democrats and Republicans before it passed the Senate. So it's important too. So we're looking at sources, we're looking at word choices, and we're looking at what they link to within the article. So they're trying to guide you towards towards more information, which isn't a bad thing. But it's important to see where they're guiding you, right? So they guide you to this impassioned speech by a Republican who supports it. So clearly they're wanting you to be convinced that this infrastructure bill is the way to go. Okay. And then they also link to hammered out by Democrats and Republicans. So it's bipartisan. They're just really driving that home. And so they also, let's see, it's an unusual phenomenon in a starkly polarized Congress, a truly bipartisan and significant bill. And I'm not arguing for or against this bill. I don't do that. That's not my shtick, right? I'm not a politician. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. What I am doing is pointing out how they differ. So I also noticed what they focus on in the bill. Expanding high-speed internet. We all want that, right? Roads, bridges, and other projects. Man, we need help there, right? Airports. Who doesn't get frustrated with airports? They all need to be updated. And funding for Amtrak. So transportation. These are all things that we need, we want, we can all agree on. So right in the middle, they say, with Democrats publicly feuding over Mr. Biden's agenda. So they've got this buried. The Wall Street Journal starts off with the feud, right, among Democrats. These guys kind of just sneak it in the middle with one sentence. Supporters of the infrastructure bill are trying to stay clear-eyed about the bill's merits, not the broader politics, because everyone hates politics. And gosh, wouldn't it be nice if all of our politicians would be more clear-eyed, right? And they argue that House Republicans are making the wrong political calculation about the infrastructure measure. Wow. I mean, they just come right out and say, House Republicans wrong, and then jump down. I just think it's not accurate, Mr. Portman said. So yeah, we are really driving that point home, that the Republicans are wrong. And these are subconscious things, right? Like if you're reading it, you're just getting the news, and there's nothing in here that's not accurate, right? That I know of, because it's a brand new story from today. And today is September 29th. So maybe, I mean, we don't know until later if it's inaccurate. So we're going to go ahead and assume that it's mostly accurate and they give most of the same information. It's just the way they deliver it that is significant. Okay, so jumping down, Joshua Bolten, the former White House Chief of Staff for George W. Bush, who is president of the Business Roundtable. Okay, so we're at the Business Roundtable. If we're Republican and we're reading this, George W. Bush, his people are behind it. They just keep interviewing these distinguished Republicans who are in support of it. And he is pushing for the bill's passage. Well, so is the New York Times. Again, I'm not against it, or I'll go the other way in just a minute. So just be patient. Don't get your panties in a twist, because that irritates me. Just think critically, all right? This is a really good bill. It's urgently needed. It will have a dramatic effect on the productivity of the U.S. economy. It's investment really well spent, he said. So we're still talking about the George W. Bush staffer, right? Pass it now and fight the bill. Have the fight over the other bill later. I'm having a little bit of a hard time talking today. I don't know why. Okay. In this case, House Republican leaders appear to be heeding pressure from conservative groups. They're always listening to those lobbyists who have disparaged the infrastructure bill as bloated with spending. So these are just, these Republicans are breaking under the pressure, and they're just, the bad guys are disparaging and bloated, because those are just words, right? And then a little bit later, they say moderate to conservative Democrats will peel away from the larger bill. So now they're kind of throwing it in there that they will like the larger bill too, right? It's subtle, but it's there. Because the term peel away is just sort of, I don't know, gross sounding to me. I don't know why. Okay, so now we're at the end of the New York Times story. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, another Republican supporter of the infrastructure plan, who is also widely respected and has been around a while, right? So it's a name we all know. They end with this really powerful quote, and it's longer than this, but I'm just going to read the very last. If it should fail, I think that in and of itself sends a pretty tough message. Ooh. So they end with the powerful quote by a Republican in favor of the infrastructure bill. Okay, let's go. We've already talked about the headline. The Wall Street Journal they're not really coming out against the infrastructure bill. It's a little more subtle, but it does seem to me that they are in support of it too, and they're trying to shift the blame. So if it fails, in the minds of the Wall Street Journal readers, they're going to blame it on the Democrats. So it's a good bill, but if it doesn't pass, it's not the Republicans' fault. They hardly mention it at all. In the same way that the Times hardly mentioned that the Democrats are also split. Right? So let's see. The very first sentence, the House Democrats' powerful progressive bloc. Bloc is spelled B-L-O-C-K. So if you know the history of the word bloc, of course, it's associated with the communist bloc, which is language from the Cold War, and it really is a triggering word for especially some older Republicans. So I mean, in my writing, I would really, unless I was talking about the Cold War specifically, I wouldn't even use the word bloc. They use it multiple times, including in the very first sentence. So that is a highly triggered word that, in my personal opinion, from a journalistic standpoint, should just be erased from journalistic language because it's such a trigger word. But that's just my opinion. Unless you're specifically talking about the Cold War. All right, so the House Democrats' powerful progressive bloc split Tuesday over whether lawmakers should vote for a roughly $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure package. So both stories are giving the same basic information. The news that they're providing you is not different. It's how it is delivered. Okay? Let's see. And I'm going to jump back to the block thing again, because don't conservatives and Republicans, don't they just love to try to equate Democrats with communism? I mean, it's just like, it's so cliche that it just bores me to tears. So as you see, I am universally not impressed. So, I don't pick favorites. I just pick it apart. Okay. In a sign of growing conflict with House Democrat leaders, some liberals reiterate their determination not to vote for the infrastructure bill. And so they also have internal links here, and it's bipartisan infrastructure package, which is linked, and then not to vote for the infrastructure bill is also a link, and gosh, so is framework for the $3.5 trillion bill. All of these links go to more stories about how the Democrats are trying to fleece America out of trillions of dollars. So that's fascinating, right? Very different from the links that are referred to in the New York Times story. And so now I want you to start paying attention to the word liberals. I did end up, as I was just reviewing this with you guys, I found the word liberal in the New York Times story. But I never did a final count, but let me see here. I believe, where did I end up? Nine references to the word liberals. So initially I was thinking that the New York Times story didn't use the word liberal at all, because the difference between progressive and liberal is sort of like the difference between moderate and centrist, right? Liberal is a huge trigger word. I mean, liberal, when you say liberal, even people who are moderate Democrats are starting to be like, oh, I hate that word liberal, right? Like, it's just like the liberal thing is just a thing that we don't like. And so the Wall Street Journal is going to really drive the liberal point home, right? 9 times in this story, and once in this story, in the New York Times story. And so they use the word progressive a lot more. They use the word moderate a lot more. They use the word compromise, and they focus on the Republicans holding up the process. The Wall Street Journal, the word liberal is in almost every paragraph, at least in the first, on the first page here. It's used 3 times in the heading, the subheading, and then in the second and third paragraphs. They are just beating the point home. So if you are a conservative Republican reading the Wall Street Journal, which many do, you are really like, the liberals are going to ruin this for us. It's always the liberals. Okay, so I just find that hilarious, actually. And so transparent. I mean, guys, come on. You could do better. Okay, so next paragraph. Once aligned with the liberal wing's demands, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi reversed herself. So instead of focusing on how the leadership from both sides are coming together, they're focusing on how the leader of the Democratic Party in the House is reversing herself. She's a flip-flopper. We remember that term, don't we? Those flip-floppers. Yep, she's a hypocrite. She can't be trusted because she changes her mind every time. Okay, guys, Republicans change their mind all the time too, right? Just stop. They all do it. It's part of the political process. So just, get over it. Democratic leaders indicate they were still trying to hammer out a framework. Oh, they're so disorganized and they just keep arguing. What a bunch of babies, right? Okay, so they are hammering out a framework for the $3.5 trillion bill, including its overall level of spending, to provide enough reassurance to get liberals on board with the infrastructure bill by Thursday. So now what they're trying to do is they're really focusing on, if the Democrats pass this, then they're trying to tie it to the larger spending bill. That was not even mentioned. I mean, it was in one little sentence mentioned in the middle of the story, in the New York Times story. This is the whole premise for this article. Like, the whole foundation of the article is about how this infrastructure bill, we need to be careful and watch it closely because they're going to tie it to this bigger spending bill. Okay, so they're talking about Nancy Pelosi. She was hopeful such a deal would reach the level that we need in order to pass the bill. Okay, so I talked about this in my first video where I analyzed news stories, and it's a broken quote. So when a quote starts with the writer's personal analysis and then ends with a quote, that's dangerous, because what they get to do is they get to put their own spin on the quote. So instead of quoting the full text of what they said, and the Wall Street Journal does this more than the New York Times. So in this particular instance, this is something that bugs me about the Wall Street Journal. The Times does it too. And all writers do, and sometimes it's just a writing technique to kind of keep the story moving and all of these things. It's not always with this nefarious intent, but it always makes me uncomfortable, especially when we're talking about these really controversial subjects, because we really just need quote-driven stories. We really just need to hear the full story, straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. We don't want the media telling us what to think. We don't want them putting their own twist on it, explaining to us what this quote means by starting out a sentence with their own analysis and then going into the quote. So to make that a little bit more clear, I'll read that again. She was hopeful that such a deal would. Okay, so this is saying that Nancy Pelosi was hoping that a deal, which the deal, I mean, even the word deal makes us uncomfortable. Like, yeah, they're just wheeling and dealing about our lives, right? This is our money. This is our country. And so she was hopeful such a deal would, and then they start their quote, reach the level that we need in order to pass both bills. So is that what she was hopeful of? Is that what the whole quote was? We don't know, because they don't give it to us, right? So unless you want to dig back in and watch tapes of Nancy Pelosi talking for hours and find it for yourself, which I do not. Okay, so moving on. The White House said late Tuesday, blah, 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 Biden is ironing out inter-party differences. So is that why? Okay, so I better read that whole thing. The White House said late Tuesday that President Biden canceled a planned trip to Chicago Wednesday to continue working with lawmakers on ironing out inter-party differences. There is a strong sense that progress is being made, and the president is staying to continue his engagement, said a person familiar with the discussion. Okay, so one, please tell me who it was. If you're on like a page 6 story about a celebrity and sources say whatever, you're on page 6. But when you're talking about a White House, like, okay, so who said this, for one thing? For another thing, they do that again. It's not a broken quote in that they do it in the same sentence, but they say he's staying home to iron out inter-party differences. And then they go into a quote that says there is a strong sense that progress is being made, etc. Wait, but was he talking about inter-party differences? We don't know. We have to take the Wall Street Journal's word for it, right? Because they don't tell us what happened before that. So be careful. Just as like a critically thinking person, I'm thinking that Biden is working with everybody to try to get this passed. This is his agenda. It's an important vote. My guess is he's talking to Republicans, he's talking to Democrats, and I mean, there's a lot of conversation happening in Washington right now, and it's going in all directions. And we know this because the Times gave us the other side of the story. But if we hadn't read the Wall Street Journal story, we wouldn't really put it together that there is a segment of the Democratic Party that is hoping to tie these two together. So this is, again, why it's so important to diversify. We've got to hear both sides, right? We've got to. If you want to be truly informed, you can't just go to your favorite warm, fuzzy news stories that tell you everything you want to hear and say horrible things about the other side, because you're not getting all the information. And it's that simple. Okay. Heading down, we're talking about centrist. There we start using that word centrist versus moderate. Centrist Democratic Senators Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. Sorry, I'm saying that wrong. Sinema. I don't know. I'm a reader, right? I'm not a speaker. So whatever. Sorry, lady. Democratic lawmakers were trying to strike a deal. There's that wheeling and dealing again on the overall amount of spending included in the package that all 50 members of the Democratic caucus would support. Okay, lots of backroom deals going on with these slimy Democrats. Reaching a deal, again, next paragraph, we're still talking about deals. Reaching a deal on that figure has eluded Democrats for weeks. Oh, they can't get their act together. And compromise just is eluding them. Oh, more about being hammered out. Another use of the word liberal. Another use of the word liberal. Let's keep going. While infrastructure has broader bipartisan support, in the Senate, House GOP leaders have urged their ranks to vote against it, arguing the proposal is now inseparable from the broader Democratic package. There we go. It's inseparable from the broader Democratic package. So, beware. The chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus reiterated that half the group's roughly 100 members were willing to withhold their vote on infrastructure. So the Times didn't even talk to the Congressional Progressive Caucus. They talked to, who did they talk to? The Chamber of Commerce. They talked to some really warm and fuzzy people. The Problem Solvers Caucus. And I'm not mocking, I mean, I am, sort of. But, I'm all for problem solving. It's just, you have to pay attention to who they go to for their sources. Because these guys are going straight to the extreme. All right. Even if there's an agreement on a number and a framework for legislation in the coming days, it could be weeks or months before the Senate is able to pass a bill. Okay, focusing on the stalemate caused by the Democrats. So, because of these progressive liberal Democrats, right, this is why nothing gets done. It's all their fault. Because we read the Times story, we also know that there's plenty of infighting among the Republicans. But if we'd only read the Times story, we wouldn't know that all this was going on. You have to diversify your sources. Okay? All right. The Congressional Progressive Caucus, argued if Democrats were able to get on the same page, they could move it faster. But if we don't move that quickly, then yes, we're going to wait until they get it done. Oh, man. And then they use the word gonna in their quote, which, by the way, this is another broken quote. They start out analyzing it, giving their own spin on what this Miss Jayapal, again, cut me some slack. I only read my news. I don't even watch TV news, so I don't know how to pronounce these names. But they put their own spin on her words and interpret it for you, which we don't need. We can give us the whole quote so we can decide for ourselves. All right, and then they say, but, and then they go into the quote. If we don't move that quickly, then yes, we're going to wait until they get it done. Well, what did she really say at the beginning of that? We don't know because they don't tell us. And then they make sure they use the part of the quote where she uses the term gonna. Gonna. That's slang. Oh, now these Democrats, they don't even know how to talk proper English, right? They just use gonna. They use slang. They're so informal and unprofessional. I mean, to me, this quote is just so unnecessary. All right. Oh, there's the word liberal again. Liberal again. And is that the same? That is the same sentence. The word liberal twice in the same sentence. And another broken quote. Passing the infrastructure bill alone, quote, now we're starting, will end all leverage that we have to pass a major reconciliation bill, said Senator Bernie Sanders. Of course they go to Bernie Sanders because every Republican on earth gets hives when they hear from Bernie Sanders. And so these guys went straight to all of these really extreme sources, and the Times went to all of these more moderate sources. Okay. So we have another quote here. from a more centrist person, Representative Peter Welch. If there's really good faith progress and we're getting assurances from the moderates that they're on reconciliation, I think a lot of them are, then the worst thing that we could do is to have everything collapse. Okay, so, and is Peter Welch a moderate? I don't know. I'm not sure about that. No, he might be more of a moderate lefter, right? Okay. So anyway, but what this quote says is the moderate Democrats are secretly just as bad. They are all in on this whole reconciliation thing and tying this bill to the larger spending bill. And, it's all their fault. The reason the world sucks is all the Democrats' fault. If Congress doesn't pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill or a short-term reauthorization by October 1st, more than 3,000 Department of Transportation employees would be furloughed. So if the Democrats can't get their poop in a pile, then they're going to shut down the government and people are going to be out of work. Wait, though, because we learned from this story that the Republicans also need to get their poop in the pile by Thursday. While Democrats continue to negotiate, where is the talk of the Republicans continuing to negotiate? It's not even in here. All right. Oh, withhold votes as a block. B-L-O-C-K. There's that word again. It's Democrats. They're just this side of communists. Cold War communists. The hardline conservative Freedom Caucus and its roughly 36 members frequently threatened to torpedo legislation and sometimes succeeded. So they're looking back at the hardline conservative group, the Freedom Caucus, and how they affected the passage of legislation when the Republicans were in charge. But something that's interesting is that they say it's roughly 36 members. Well, if you remember earlier, they talk about the 100-member Progressive Caucus. So these guys, they've got 36 jerks. And it's only 36. And they really minimize it. By saying 36 instead of 36, our subconscious brain is going to zero in on that 3. So even though it says 36, our subconscious brain is like, oh, so there's 3 guys in the Republican Party who stagnate it, but there's 100 on the left, those liberals. Okay, the progressives have long pushed back on comparisons to the Freedom Caucus, saying their group's goal was to shape legislation, not to stop it. So this again, they're hypocrites, right? They're doing the same thing that they used to criticize the right for doing. So now we're down to the end. Now they start using the word centrist a lot. They've done it a few times, but they really focus in on that centrist versus moderate at the end of the story. And they also end with a powerful quote from a centrist, Representative Stephanie Murphy, a Democrat from Florida. And she says, it's critically important that we pass the infrastructure bill because I think it will provide us the momentum that we need to get the reconciliation bill across the finish line. So, the centrist Democrats are in on the whole thing. And yeah, maybe we want to pass this infrastructure bill, but we need to beware because they're all in on it and they have an ulterior motive. Okay, so that's my analysis of those 2 stories. My conclusion. And if you've taken my class or watched my other videos, I've actually, in the 2 other news analysis that I've done so far, I've kind of sided with the Wall Street Journal. as far as like my final analysis of, is this the most balanced reporting? How successful is the reporter or the reporters at keeping their own bias in check? Because remember, we all have bias. But it was really just sort of a luck of the draw, because I do just pick two stories at towards the top of whatever is the current story of the day, and I just go with it, and I don't really, it's just so, anyway, my conclusion from reading both these stories is that both sides are playing politics. Of course they are. It's politics. It's what they do. The media on the right and the left are trying to pin public blame on the opposing side. So if it doesn't pass tomorrow, the infrastructure bill, if you've been reading the Wall Street Journal exclusively, and it's pretty safe to assume that all right-leaning news media is doing the same thing. If you've been reading only the Wall Street Journal, you're going to assume that it doesn't pass, and potentially the government, at least portions of it, get shut down because the Democrats can't agree, and it's all their fault. If you've been reading the New York Times, you believe that it is the Republicans' fault. You don't even know all this other stuff is going on. You have to read both, guys. Watch both if you must. I'm not a fan of broadcast news, especially cable news. I don't even really try to hide that because I'm just not. Okay. So both papers appear to be in support of the infrastructure bill. The Wall Street Journal is a little more hesitant because they're worried about this tie with the larger legislation, the larger budget. And that's okay to know. That's good to know. We need to know that there's this other possibility. But we also need to know that there is disagreement within the Republican Party, too. We need to know it all. So, to me, this is just fascinating. I love it. The fact that the word liberal is used 9 times in the Wall Street Journal story and once in the New York Times story, and it was used in a way that was like, there's this little chunk of liberals over here who are wreaking havoc and messing up this glorious infrastructure bill. So yeah, I operate from a place of sarcasm a lot. I really, truly don't think that the vast majority of the people are bad at doing this. These are just people, and they have a job to do, and we elected them to do the job. And the journalists aren't bad people either. They have their own bias. They have their own advertising revenue that they need to maintain in order to keep their staff employed. I talk a lot about this kind of stuff in my course. So if you're interested in this topic and how it all fits together, head over to learning.sarabethwald.com. You can sign up for my Mastering the Media course, and there's also a little free giveaway over there. You can go to my Facebook group, Mastering the Media. You can find me on Facebook. I'm Sara Beth Wald. I do content-empowered learning. You can find me here on YouTube. There's just all kinds of ways to stay connected on this. This isn't the only thing I talk about. I also talk a lot about a framework that I created in response to trauma called Redefining Love that teaches you how to love others from a distance sometimes. It teaches boundaries, accountability, and grace. So I'm kind of all over the place, and I love just connecting with people and helping them to feel a little less scared in these unsettled times, and to heal. Pretty passionate about healing division from a society standpoint, and also pretty passionate about healing from trauma within individuals. So that's it. Thanks for watching. like and subscribe. Please. Have a great day. For more hope and inspiration, like and subscribe to Content Empowered Learning.